I think it's tempting to think of fashioning imagery of God to worship as a thing of the past. But like the rest of God's law, the second commandment is spiritual. It applies to the heart, and our hearts are always trying to remake God in our own image. You see, we want to make God into an image that we can understand, into an image that we can control, into an image that we can manipulate, that we can understand the boundaries on. You see, like the Israelites who made the golden calf to reassure themselves of God's protection over them and to meet their immediate felt needs, we are just the same. You see, rather than worshiping God in spirit and in truth, we reshape him, we remake him so that he is safely under our control. You see, most commonly what you see is that when people say, I like to think of God as X, Y, or Z, I like to think of God this way, they're usually remaking God in their own image and breaking the second commandment. You see, we tend to emphasize the things about God we like and minimize the stuff we don't, right? We fashion a God of pure, unending love, and we minimize his just judgment of sin. You see, we fashion a God of limitless forgiveness, and we minimize his justice and his righteousness. We fashion a God who approves of all of our choices, and we minimize his holiness, and we minimize his purity. You see, in our distorted worship of God, our inaccurate worship of God, our wrong worship of the right God is usually a side effect of trying to worship something else alongside or ahead of him. It's usually a side effect of breaking the first commandment. You see, what we really worship is power. What we really long for is influence over people or over situations. And so we fashion a God who needs us to make his will happen. We fashion a God who cares more about outcomes than he does about people. We fashion a God who always agrees with our positions and demonizes anyone who holds a different one. But that is not a true image of God. You see, what God really wants is for us to trust and rely on his power always to bring about our will and his will and our good. What God wants is for us to be conformed to the image of him. And what that means is that we are out of line with it. And so to believe in a God that always agrees with us is to believe in a false God altogether. You see, what we really worship is control. You see, what we pursue at any cost is control over our life and our circumstances, our situation. And so what we do is we fashion a God that never, ever wants us to worry about money, who always wants us to have more than enough. We fashion a God that never asks us to walk by faith and not by sight. We fashion an image of God who always shows us the end before we take the first step, who would never ask us to do something in faith or something uncertain. You see, but that is not a true image of God. You see, the real God wants us to rely on him for everything. The true God calls us often to trust and follow him in situations that require that we don't know where we're going. You see, or sometimes what we really worship is comfort. What we long for most is an easy life free from stress and responsibility. And so we fashion a God who loves to bless, who loves to be generous, but one who would never ask us to sacrifice for him or for the good of others. We fashion a God who wants us to have the perfect job or the perfect family or the perfect kids, a God who just wants those things to fulfill all our hopes and dreams, a God who never requires us to die to ourselves and our own desires and our own pleasures. You see, but that is not a true image of God. See, the truth is that God wants us to pour ourselves out for his glory and for the good of others, who wants us to be satisfied in him and in nothing else. Sometimes what we worship is approval. See, the thing we long for most, the thing that holds the overwhelming, controlling influence on our life is the acceptance and the affirmation of our family or our friends or our coworkers. And so we fashion a God that's okay with a little dishonesty. We fashion a God that's okay with taking credit for work that isn't ours sometimes. It's just the cost of that promotion. We fashion a God who approves of every and any sexual practice or expression, you see, because we can't afford to tell someone that what they're doing might be wrong. You see, we fashion a God that's okay with taking a back seat while you prioritize your family or your career or all the things that matter more to you than him and what people think is best for you than what he does. You see, but that is not a true image of God. See, the true God, the real God, demands supreme loyalty. He demands exclusive devotion. He demands complete obedience. You see, the reality is that we break the second command all the time. You see, we try to fashion an image of God we try to worship an image of God that we have fashioned ourselves. One that will meet our needs, one that will give us what we long for, one in which we can control and manage and have in a box. But that's not the true God, is it? In doing so, we distort and we dishonor the true God. And so the question is this morning, how do we obey? If the default mode of our heart is always to fashion God in our own image, how do we obey? How do we worship the right God in the right way? And the answer is quite simple, yet incredibly profound. One commentator puts it this way: rather than remaking God into our own image, we need to be remade into his image. God does this by bringing us into a personal and saving relationship with his son, Jesus.